You know, you mentioned this a couple of times, and even as we're speaking, I'm thinking like I know that there were other magazines out at the time, you know, the Jets, the Ebonies, the Essence, but they weren't necessarily speaking to our audience. They wasn't speaking to the hip hop consumer. Was the Source not just the first to get it right, but the first publication that was actually speaking directly to the hip hop culture?
Yeah, I mean, the only other magazines of note that were really around were the Word Up and the Right On type of magazines, that had the big pictures and pull out posters and what's Slick Rick's favorite food or that kind of content.
I kind of look at those as fanzines. Those are magazines you would go to if you wanted a pull out poster of your favorite star. But the Source came in different. The Source came in as a very authentic, incredible publication. Chuck D didn't call it the Bible of hip hop for no reason. It really was the place you wanted to go for the source of the information. And speaking of that, where did the name come from? Who came up with the name?
I came up with the name back in that kind of spring, summer of '88, as I was putting the plan together to create the newsletter. I had a red Jetta back then. That was my dream car growing up in DC, was to get a Jetta, because that's what all the hustlers were driving in DC back in the '80s. So I was finally able to get a Jetta. And anyways, I was riding around in the car through town or whatever, and I was listening to the new Boogie Down Productions album. And I think, I'm trying to remember if this is My Philosophy, whatever the album was that came out in spring of '88, you can look it up. But there's a song on there, I think it's just Slippin', where KRS says something, you want to hear a fresh rhyme, you come to the Source.
Mm-hmm.
And that just stuck in my head, driving around listening to him, like, oh, there it is. I'm gonna call it the Source. And the name obviously stuck. But that's not a lot of people know that story. I've only told it a couple of times, where that name actually came from.
You launched this thing in '88, and by 1990, y'all are moving. All things considered, 24 months is not a long time to get any business, not just a magazine, but any business up off the ground and moving. And what I love about some of the things, because you guys were very, very creative, and you implemented some things into the magazine that just cemented it as the place that anybody should go to know what's really popping in hip hop. Like, Chuck D, again, I want to stick to that whole, the Bible of hip hop. And I thought it was just so creative how you guys implemented the rating system with the 5 mics. Who came up with that whole 5 mic rating system? And for that matter, do you remember who was the first artist to get 5 mics? And can you even name 5 artists that ever received 5 mics?
Okay, you hit me with the trivia. So, as the Source got going, John Schechter and James Bernard, began to put together a small team of writers and editors and contributors to the magazine. And these were all young people. We were all living and loving the culture of hip hop. It was our lives, and everybody was very passionate about it, and the Source was done in a way that it didn't talk down to its readers. We spoke to the people in a language, that they understood, and from a point of view that they could relate to. And that's just because of, the people that we had involved. So I think the record reviews start in 1990. That summer of 1990, that Ice Cube issue I was talking about was the first issue where we rated albums, and I think we were rating singles back then. We came up with the 1 to 5 scale of rating, but it wasn't mics yet. If you have any of those old issues of The Source, you'll see it's like an exploding record image that was 1 to 5 of those. But we had the descriptions: 1, totally whack; 5, a hip hop classic. Those, we had that, and we had the 1 to 5. So, the first, I think in that summer 1990 issue, there may have been a couple albums that got 5 rating. America's Most Wanted from Ice Cube, I think, was one of those. And there was I think it was a BDP album or a KRS-One album that also got a 5 rating in that issue. So I think those were the first. We came up with the mics and changed it to the mics somewhere around 91, maybe middle of 91. And I don't know who actually came up with that idea. It wasn't me. It might have been John Schechter or one of the other people working on the editorial side. Yeah, that's how it started. And there was a few other albums, that got 5 mics in those early years. Brand Nubian, their debut album, One for All, got 5 mics. Tribe Called Quest. I know Low End Theory got 5 mics, and I'm not sure, but maybe People's Instinctive Travels did. I have to double check that. But Tribe is, I believe, the only artist to ever get 2 5-mic albums, at least originally rated as 5 mics. And then one of the most famous ones, of course, was Nas, Illmatic, that got 5 mics because, that really had a huge impact on Nas' career. Nas, he had a buzz, as you probably remember. He had the Live at the Barbecue, and then he had the halftime and stuff like that. But, right before Illmatic dropped, he didn't have that level of buzz with some of the bigger artists that were out there. And, we gave it that 5 mics right when it dropped. We had to do these reviews back then. The cycle was different. You had to work 2-3 months in advance before things came out. So we were able to get advanced copies of albums, and we would, spend hours listening to them, debating them. As a group, the Mind Squad was the group of writers and editors that would get together regularly to listen.
How much input did you have in giving 5 mics, or 1 mic for that matter?
I didn't get very involved in the ratings. I was so busy trying to build the business of the magazine. There was so much to do with the magazine. And then, of course, by 91, I'm already expanding my vision from magazine to brand to multimedia company. I went from saying I'm building the Rolling Stone of hip hop. By 91, I'm talking about I'm building the Time Warner of hip hop. And so, I really trusted the guys that were doing the editorial, and generally let them, not just the guys and the women. We had some, really amazing women that were part of that original Mind Squad. Dream Hampton, who's gone on to do amazing things, and Kieran Mayo were both original editors at The Source and part of that Mind Squad. Kieran Mayo is now kind of reunited with me with Breakbeat, that I guess we'll talk about soon, the new network I just launched. And she has one of our first shows called Culturati that she's hosting. That's a really dope show. But so yeah, it was a group of people. But yeah, I rarely got involved. I mean, I kept my eye on what was going on, with the magazine and the content. And I had input, if I heard something that I thought was dope, I would bring it down and say, hey, let's check this out. We need to get them in the magazine, that type of thing. But I didn't spend a lot of time in those ratings meetings.
From an artist standpoint, that was the holy grail artists actually went into the booth. They pinned their albums with that 5 mic rating system in mind. But another thing that I thought that you guys did from a marketing standpoint that was just brilliant was you focused on unsigned talent. And you entitled it Unsigned Hype. Out of that Unsigned Hype column, it came people like the Notorious B.I.G., DMX, Mobb Deep, Eminem. Who was it that came up with that column? Because that column is arguably the most important column in the history of any hip hop publication. Was that something you guys actually expected to blow?
Well, yeah, Unsigned Hype is probably, it's a legendary column and probably, arguably, the most influential magazine column in history, in terms of the influence it had on the genre. It started in 1990 while we were still at Harvard. I think the first Unsigned Hype was in the spring of 1990. People started mailing in their demo tapes to us once we had the magazine distributing around the country, and we had a mailing address that we would print in the masthead, and people started sending in their demo tapes to us. And I'm pretty sure it was John Schechter who came up with that original idea of Unsigned Hype. Matty C was already working with us as well. Matty C was a student at NYU at the time, and Matty's also from DC, and me and Matt had known each other a little bit back in DC, but he was a couple years younger than me, and but he knew some people at NYU that knew John Schechter and some of his friends, and so Matty and my man Rob Tulo, they were some of the first people working out of New York before we even moved down there for the Source and helping with that, Matty in particular with Unsigned Hype. And we're actually doing the first documentary series right now on Unsigned Hype and how it originated and all the impact it had. It's a 8-part documentary podcast series that I'm doing for my new network, Breakbeat. We're already in the middle of production on it. It's going to come out probably at the top of the year, but we're going to tell the whole backstory of that column, where it came from, how, you mentioned a few. I mean, Biggie, DMX, Eminem, Common, Mobb Deep, Capone and Nori, David Banner, Joel Santana, Jay Electronica. There's others. All of these artists got their start, in the Source Unsigned Hype, and many of them we were basically got them their record deals. Of course, Biggie being one of the biggest stories. I can remember in '92 we had just put Big in Unsigned Hype, and Matty did that. I think Mr. C brought the demo tape up to Matt and played it for him at the Source, and then Matt would run around the office playing it for everybody, getting their feedback. And Matt he loved Big, and so he put him in Unsigned Hype. And maybe a few weeks later, a month later, is when I got a phone call from Puff, and Puff was A&Ring at Uptown, and I had met Puff when he first started as an intern at Uptown back in probably '89, because even though I was in college, I would come down to New York every now and then. I would take trips down and bring down boxes of the magazines and go visit the record labels and, poly with the different folks at the labels and stuff like that. So I can remember meeting Puff. He had a little small desk in the interior office at Uptown in '89 when we first, became friends. And but of course he had become very successful doing A&R, and they had just decided, I think Andre Harrell, rest in peace, had decided to give him an imprint deal for his label, and it was still under Uptown, but it was for Bad Boy, and so he was looking for artists, and he mentioned it to me. He was like, you guys have anybody? And I went down to Matty's office, first thing I did, and said, what do you got? And he was like, man, this big, this Notorious B.I.G. is dope. And so Matt ended up bringing the tape up or sending the tape up to Puff. And I mean, literally a few weeks, maybe a month later, Big got signed. The rest is history, so to speak.
That's super dope, man. Yo, that's super dope. Tyson Beckford did an interview with Vlad TV, and he actually credited the Source for giving him his start. It makes all the sense in the world that Notorious B.I.G., Eminem, Mobb Deep, they would be discovered by the Source. But Tyson Beckford? I get he's definitely part of the culture, but you don't necessarily think of high-end fashion when you think of the Source. You think of hip-hop. How did that happen?
Buddy of mine, Eric Lauren Council, who worked at Source Magazine at the time. They were the first ones. They were the first publication that ever gave me a job as a model.
Yeah, shout out to Tyson, man. I saw that interview and I was happy to hear him tell the story. Yeah, obviously, we recognize hip hop as a culture, not just the music back in those early years. And so the magazine reflected that with coverage of different aspects of the culture, and fashion, being one of them. So we started like a small fashion section in the Source. And so one of our very first fashion sections, there was an art director that worked at the Source named Eric Council, and I guess he was walking around somewhere in New York and noticed Tyson playing basketball on a basketball court and just approached him and was like, hey, you want to be in a photo shoot for the new fashion section of the Source? And that's how it happened. It came out. That was Tyson's first modeling job, and the rest is history with him as well. And there were others too. I mean, Aaron McGruder, who created the Boondocks, I really kind of launched his career. That was me. I mean, Aaron started the Boondocks as a cartoon strip in the University of Maryland college newspaper. And I remember going home, this is in the mid 90s, going home to DC, and I think my mom had one of the newspapers. She was working at University of Maryland, and she had a newspaper, and I'm flipping through it, and I seen the Boondocks cartoon in there. I'm like, man, this is dope. And I contacted him, and so the Boondocks ended up running in the Source every month for a year or two. This was before they got their cartoon strip in the newspapers and everything else that's happened with the Boondocks. So that's an example of another type of person whose career came through this, really got started through the Source, and just, yeah. And there's others, a lot of executives too, a lot of people that worked at the Source, a lot of writers. You may be familiar with, somebody like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's, very well-known author and speaker. I mean, he was a Howard University student, and he was writing record reviews for the Source. That was his first writing work. And, there's many, many others who have gone on from either working at or writing or contributing to the Source to do amazing things still around, to this day.